If newborn babies had no human interaction at all, when they reached a certain age, what language would they speak? Or what will their first word be? How will they communicate with each other?
Good morning, New Yorkers. Looking for another beautiful day here in the city.
We all know that babies learn the languages they are surrounded by. They start to record what they hear and see at a young age, and they copy what they see, like emotions, happy or sad face, physical movements, and eventually the language we speak around them. But when they are not exposed to any language, spoken or signed, will they create their own language? And would it be enough to isolate the babies from human speech? Or they should be isolated from humans too? For centuries, all of these questions have been asked by many people and have been so fascinating for many. They somehow came to the conclusion that for babies to create their own language, they should be isolated from social interactions so that they can find out the origin of the language. But thanks to the moral controversy related to it, there are very few experiments on this subject, which makes it hard to find since they are unethical and inhumane. Some royal people in the past were driven enough by this question that they decided to isolate some babies in survival mode to find answers to this question.
God, it's brutal out here.
Psamtik I, the pharaoh of Egypt, was the first to provide an answer to this question. Is that why they called him Psamtik I? In the book Histories by Greek historian Herodotus, he explains that Psamtik I ordered 2 newborn babies and appointed a shepherd with goats to provide milk as needed. And by order, I mean to make this happen, they were taken away from their families so as to raise them at the very least human speech or interaction. The shepherd had been strictly warned that he was not allowed to speak, talk, or mumble. He was not allowed to expose the babies to any human speech or interaction. 2 years pass by, Psamtik I comes back to check on the babies, and he hears their cry of the word because. It made him think that the babies had developed their own language. Maybe they were just babbling something, but Psamtik I was not thinking the same. Since the word because didn't exist in the Egyptian language, he did some research on what nation had that word. And after some time, he discovered that the word because was Persian for bread. So the Egyptians interpreted this as the origin of themselves and their language. But it didn't stop there. Someone else tried around the same experiment. They were real babies, people. This time it was carried out by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II of Sicily. He was the second person running this experiment, so that's why they called him Frederick II, right? I'm kidding, don't take it seriously. The same rules follow the process. He gave 5 babies over to the care of foster mothers, and the babies got isolated from any human speech or interaction. Frederick II was seeking to discover what language would have been imparted unto Adam and Eve by God. So he thought those babies, without being exposed to any language, would speak the languages of the ancient texts: Hebrew, Greek, Latin, or Arabic. Or perchance the tongue of their parents of whom they had been born. But tragically, the origin of the language remained unknown to him and to us. His attempt at the experiment ended in failure. According to Salimbene, he labored in vain, for the children could not live without clapping of the hands and gestures and gladness of countenance and blandishments. And James IV of Scotland continued the same experiment with similar methods. Shame that it's not James III. He placed 2 babies to be raised by a mute woman on an island called Inchkeith. His purpose was to find out if the language was learned or innate, but he was hoping that they would develop a pre-Tower Babel speech. Some say they spoke good Hebrew, but the novelist Sir Walter Scott quotes that it is more likely they will scream like their nurse or bleat like the goats and sheep on the island. Like they will probably only babble. The last experiment got different results. Mughal Emperor Akbar ran the same experiment on 12 infants, and he appointed mute nurses for their supervision, care, and needs. The rules were the same for the nurses. Akbar placed the babies and the nurses in the palace of the mute. He made sure that they were isolated in utter solitude from the outside world. But after 4 years, when the babies reached a certain age, they turned out to be mute. It was a disappointment for Akbar, and the isolation period was eventually cancelled a few years later. In the Davistan text around 1648, this subject is mentioned as, in like manner, a number of children were put in a place called Gang Mahal, where everything necessary was furnished to them, but none could articulate a letter. Having remained there to their 14th year, they were found to be dumb, which made it evident that letters and language are not natural to men, that is, cannot be used unless they have been acquired by instruction, and it is then only that the use of conversation becomes possible. These experiments, where an infant was not exposed to any linguistic stimuli, caused babies to suffer from language deprivation, or if you find the language deprivation title a little too innocent for this brutal experiment, American author Roger Shattuck refers to it as the forbidden experiment in his book that he published in 1980. The lesson of this experiment was the innate need for mankind to be social. But except for these experiments that were done on purpose, there have been also babies who got naturally isolated. Some children were not exposed to these methods, but still had to grow up away from human interaction in the wild. The feral children. Since they have never communicated with humans, they had the language skills of the animals they were raised by. The name of one of these children was John, or as you can find on the internet, Monkey Boy. A traumatized boy was abandoned in the dense jungle of Uganda when he was around 3 years old. Sesbignon was born in the midst of the conflict. After seeing his mother murdered by his father, he fled into the jungle and raised by a colony of African green monkeys. According to Sesbignon, he later vaguely recalled how he first made contact with the monkeys. He was on his own in the jungle for a few days before the first monkey came up to him and offered him some food. The monkeys were very cautious at first until they decided that he posed no threat. And about 2 weeks later, they taught him how to climb trees and search for food. In 1991, a tribeswoman accidentally discovered him. His adoptive father says, "At the time, the area was in the middle of a bloody civil war, and few humans came near that patch of jungle. And Millie went further than she had meant in search of firewood. She came across a small pack of monkeys and realized there was something odd about one. She thought there was something wrong with one of the monkeys because it had no tail. At first, they couldn't tell if it was a human or a monkey, not only because he acted like a monkey, but also because initial reports suggested that he had long hair that covered his face and body, called hypertrichosis. Once he was captured and cleaned up, he was taken to a nearby village. He has been taught how to speak and thankfully he's become a very good singer. There have been many more feral children raised by animals, not just monkeys but also wolves, ostriches, and goats. So eventually all children's behavior became the behavior of the animals they were raised by. Okay, so these were the examples so far. And first and foremost, isolating a human being and confiscating their rights is not even a matter up for debate. But given the technological circumstances in which we are living today,
what would be the most nightmare scenario you can imagine with AI and robotics that might present a danger to people?
The most nightmare scenario I can imagine with AI and robotics is a world where robots have become so powerful that they are able to control or manipulate humans without their knowledge.
Do you think we're in danger of that happening now?
Not yet.
but if babies get raised by a robot or an AI, what do you think then the result will be? Do you think the babies that got raised by robots would have better character for society, since they'll only learn what you teach them, not a single input from outside world, not a single bad influence? Would their decisions be completely morally correct? Or still would their conscience and emotions affect their decisions? Or should we only isolate ourselves to find the origin of humankind?
This facility was designed to give humanity a second chance, one that began with you.
Well, I hope you folks enjoyed yourselves. Catch you later on down the trail.